Okay, welcome everybody. This is a seminar by Think with the Transport and Health Integrated Research Network. My name's Lucy Baker, and today we're joined by Nicola Christie, Professor of Transport Safety at University College London, and Dr Cosmin Popan, who's a Leverhulme Early Career Fellow at Manchester Metropolitan University. So today's seminar is Gig Economy Logistics, Health and Wellbeing. We know that deliveries from online shopping and platform-based consumption have increased extensively in the past couple of years, which has been spurred by COVID lockdowns and technical developments prior to COVID. And several companies have capitalised on the increased demand for deliveries, which have proved quite convenient for many of us to get food and goods fairly quickly into places of convenience. And of course, the work that we're doing as part of the Think collective involves understanding the impact of transport and logistics to our health and well-being. So today we're focusing on the impact the gig and platform economies have on our health and well-being of both the people involved in this line of work and the public as we strive for greater equality. So I'll take some questions from the audience after each presentation. If you can either raise your hand to put your question forward, or you can pop it in the chat. So unless you're asking a question, if you can keep your microphones off. The session is being recorded straight away. And if you encounter any problems, then you can email think@abba.ac.uk. I'll pop that in the chat now. So without further ado, if I can please hand over to our first speaker, Nicola Christie, who's presenting on delivering hot food on motorcycle, risks associated with the gig economy.
Thank you. Right, so the aim of the study was to compare the road injury risks of people who deliver on food on motorcycles in relation to the business model. So this was either people who were employed by restaurants or people who just access their work by delivering by using their mobile phone and downloading an app. For those of you who don't know what app-based gig economy looks like, so work is accessed by signing up to a mobile phone. Jobs come in, they're notified by the app, so it continually beeps to let people know that the jobs are available. These jobs have to be accepted or rejected within a certain time period, and if people don't accept the jobs, then it can lead to a rejection level that kicks people off the system. So they are motivated to respond quickly, whatever they're doing at the time. And the system allocates jobs and tells the rider how to get there. People can sign up for multiple delivery apps, so it's not just one, and they're often operating in complex urban centres. And these apps often pay higher rates when the weather is bad. So anyone who knows that motorcycling is risky in wet and icy conditions, well, these apps incentivise people to work in those conditions. So these are the courier recruitment interfaces, and they all look nice and shiny and clean and healthy, and you know it's a good job, and for many it is a good job and a good way to earn money. So what did we do? So we had a mixed method design, so we did some in-depth qualitative interviews with riders both in the gig economy employed by restaurants, and also some managers of people who employed riders, and also an online survey amongst riders. So yeah, that's what we did. So what did we talk? We talked about things like distractions. So we found that phones are regarded as distraction for gig workers, highly distracting, and they needed to continually do it down at their phone because there was this pressure to accept or reject a job quickly. This was regarded as a workload factor that generated risks and also exacerbated by poor weather. So they could be looking down at their phone and the screen is wet and they need to respond quickly. And a lot of this work is at night as well, so you've got that to add in. The delivery route was generated by the app, but this could mean that a rider with CBT could be sent on a motorway, which of course is illegal for learners. In terms of protective equipment, so many of the employed workers were provided with a range of equipment, including cameras, waterproof jackets, protective clothes, high-vis vests. Some gig workers were provided with waterproof jackets, which they felt offered no protection in the event of a crash, and they provided their own safety equipment. Other equipment that was provided by companies were perceived to create risks, such as the capacity of the food box, with the weight of the food in the back box affecting stability whilst cornering. So if you've got a couple of litres of Coke and some McDonald's in, a litre of liquid weighs a kilo. So you've got extra weight that they're carrying. We asked them about pressure. So people who were employed by restaurants didn't feel the pressure, but it was keenly felt by gig workers, and it was negatively evaluated by them and led to rushing. And this was particularly at weekends when demand was high. Many of these motorcyclists are on their bike for quite a few hours, and fatigue was experienced by both the gig and employed workers. We had mentions of people said that they fell asleep on their bike at traffic lights, or they're outside a customer's house and they fell asleep. And believe it or not, this also happens to pedal cyclists. I know this, we're mainly talking about motorcyclists, but I didn't think that was possible, but it is possible. In terms of speeding, the theme of speeding was prevalent for both the gig and the employed riders. They admitted to running through red lights, not giving way at roundabouts, weaving between trafficking queues and swerving between traffic, and speeding in the back roads, which they felt they were less likely to get caught for doing so. We asked them about the police. They said few had been experienced being stopped by the police, and they didn't feel they were likely to be stopped either. Weather conditions such as rain and ice were cited by both groups of riders as a source of risk. We also asked them about their experience of collisions and near misses. Riders in both groups had experienced crashes, injury and near misses. These had mainly been with car drivers. Junctions were felt to be particularly risky, and it was believed to be very hazardous delivering in dark and wet conditions. And they said they often experienced near misses with pedestrians in city centres. When we asked them about, were there any management of risk by the companies? Of course, the gig said there was no discernible risk management. Often they have videos that they can watch when they first sign up, but they said there was no real risk management. Whereas the employed said they felt part of a team, had a personal relationship, they were encouraged to take breaks, they were not expected to work in treacherous conditions, and some were encouraged to report collisions. So they felt that safety was promoted as part of their corporate responsibility and that their behaviour was actively monitored. So we did these qualitative interviews and we thought, well, then often qualitative interviews are there's a small number, let's do a bigger sample to see if these kind of views are prevalent amongst the gig riders and employed riders. So we had a sample of half each, around 300 in total. And we wanted to know if the quantitative results supported what we found in the qualitative interviews amongst riders. And the answer is yes, it did. This is just a bit of background. So this is showing that a lot of them just had a CBT provisional licence only. We asked them about rate of pay. So we can see that rate of pay is different for gig riders when the weather is bad or when it's antisocial hours, and they are paid more at that time, whereas it's more of a flat rate for people working in restaurants. We asked about training, whether they're told not to use their phone, whether they had a good relationship with the company, whether they were questioned if they were travelling too fast or whether their speed of delivery was monitored, and whether they were suggested to take rest breaks. And you can just see throughout this, so the employed are generally more positive in terms of everything we know about fatigue and risk management in this graph. And I'm sure you'll get a copy of these slides afterwards. In terms of equipment provided by the company, once again, you can see that for the employed riders, they're much more likely to be given protective equipment, so protective jackets, and they're more likely to be insured, have waterproof jackets, protective trousers, suits, boots, etc., provided by the company, whereas in the gig, they have to provide their own. We asked them about distraction by phone, and we can see that actually in the gig, obviously it's not relevant for those people who are working employed by restaurants, but you can see that the gig people found it much more distracting than those that are employed by restaurants. Asking about loads and weaving in traffic again, you can see that the gig were more likely to say that their loads made them feel unstable. The more they can carry, the more they can earn because their rate is per delivery. And there was more likely to say that they were weaving in traffic when it was congested. In terms of violations, crashes and perceptions being caught by the police, you can see that the gig, this is percentage agreeing, so the people in the gig were saying that they agreed that there was a low chance of being stopped by the police. They're more likely to have ridden through a red light under pressure, more likely to have taken action to avoid a crash, struggling to stay awake, pressure leads to speeding, and again, all the things that we know in terms of risk, more likely to be injured in a collision and their vehicle damaged, more likely to have licence points, and actually say they have been stopped by the police. In terms of whether the company cared about their safety, so interestingly, the employed were much more likely to say that they felt that they were cared for by the company than the gig. We did some multivariate analysis, just looking at, obviously it's not enough collisions reported to do it for actual injury collisions, but we looked at those that agreed that they travelled over the speed limit and what predicted that, and controlling for things that we know about age, gender and exposure. It's actually being young and working for a gig company that were the significant explanatory variables associated with saying that they travelled over the speed limit. We also talked to managers, and don't forget this is just the restaurants only, so these are people that employ riders, to look at their kind of safety culture. So around half of the managers had a company policy that acted as contract with the riders and included something on road safety. They wanted to manage safety to avoid penalty charge notices. They felt that they all had a strong approach to incident management, and that they could, riders had to record if an accident happened, and this could trigger an HR investigation. The process of reviewing what happened was felt to be a good way of creating a blame-free self-safety culture, especially for the younger riders. They said that they provided a range of equipment, and this was also linked to their insurance policy, so they had to be seen to be doing the right thing to be covered by their insurance. We asked about issues around scheduling, so could they schedule things to make it a lot easier, and they said it didn't come up as a critical issue in managing deliveries. Most reported they could not schedule in advance, though one did offer customers delivery slots. Riders were often given leeway in terms of delivery time of a few minutes. Some companies did things like take riders out on trial runs to see how they got on. Other companies offered training if they were not confident about the riders' skills. And most managers were concerned about the roadworthiness of the motorbikes and had regular scheduled checks by local garages. We asked them about speed. They had very mixed views about whether or not their riders were speeding. They said, they told them not to rush or exceed the speed limits, but others felt that, they didn't necessarily know what their riders do once they'd left the restaurant. Interestingly, some of the restaurant companies actually used telematics, so it was used to manage risk. So one company got a weekly and a monthly report, which led to what they said led to 0% speeding, because they used it to monitor behaviours. They had trackers on their bikes, and riders have their own score, and if the score is below a particular threshold, they get flagged and the managers talk to them. And the issue is advised not to accelerate and not to do the harsh braking. For those that don't know much about telematics, these are kind of key metrics that are used. And drivers with the lowest score are talked to and given proper advice. And if they're in the bottom three, then they can get flagged in the system, and this can generate a warning. And if they get a number of warnings, they can lose their job. The system was also used in a positive way to reward riders on a quarterly basis with a £50 voucher if they got the top score. So they're monitoring changes in behaviour, and they felt that improved safety and reduced their insurance premiums. So it's all linked to better business for the restaurants and greater safety for the riders. So this is what they felt. The drawbacks of telematics, so for some of them, there's no point putting on a tracker on someone who is self-employed. So some people did actually use riders who were self-employed. Others said they only used it to check up if the rider got a speeding ticket, and there is obviously a cost to the business of using telematics. We asked managers about their views on ways to manage risk. So we asked them, you know, why use a motorbike? Why not use a car? And they said, well, a car is not practical for delivery. It takes too long. And bikes are quicker than cars and more flexible in city centres. We asked them about trainings. They said that companies could insist on more than a CBT licence. And they did say that the whole CBT offer needed to be developed and improved, and that should be led by the government. They said that formal training and induction process for the riders supported with classroom sessions would be good to boost their awareness and road safety sense. But there's obviously a cost of providing this, especially if they were only employed a small number of riders. We asked them about technology. They said telematics could be adopted in both the gig and employed business model. Sorry, this is my recommendations, not necessarily theirs, but it is linked to them. Could be adopted by both groups to monitor driving behaviour and to reward a safe driving report. Potentially you could exclude people from digital platforms if their telematic score shows a high level of unsafe riding. Potentially you could have speed limiters. It seems bizarre to me that mobile phones are allowed to be used, and less distracting interfaces need to be developed by the digital platform industries. And why not sign up for blocks of time with a set number of jobs and set pay? So this would reduce the need for sporadic messaging about available jobs. Training did come up as an issue. So monthly training to reinforce and reteach safe riding. Managers did suggest an independent body to assess if they're safe enough to ride a motorcycle in delivery work. For managing risk, it was felt that app companies need to find a way of monitoring hours of work. So a motorcyclist and gig can sign up for several companies and can be working for many hours. So how do we know if they're not kind of exceeding the hours we expect of any kind of commercial driver? It seems bizarre to me that they can incentivise to take additional risks by paying a higher rate in poor weather conditions or in antisocial hours. There is no managers that have responsibility for safety, so something could be appointed locally. And it's felt that it was needed to be a forum to set up to enable workers to interface with app companies to express their views and grievances. And I know some of these exist, so there are app-based workers associations. And also, I think we need to learn from collisions. So journey purpose is becoming a mandatory field in Stats 19 police injury reporting. Whether or not we will know if someone is working in food delivery, I don't know, but I think that is an important piece of information that we need to gather. Finally, this is one of my favourite graphics. It's from Patrick Hudson's Maturity of Safety Culture, and it's a ladder. So if we think of the aviation industry as being generative, so a very mature safety culture, where would we put the gig economy? I would say it's pathological. So they don't really care as long as they don't get caught. These results are available in an open access journal, which you can download. We hope to arrange a workshop with users and other stakeholders to think about what can be done to look at some of these risks that are generated by gig work. And I've got another project at the moment that is looking at the role of telematics in managing road risk in delivery sector towards developing an ethical delivery standard. This is TRL and National Highways and Road Safety, funded by Road Safety Trust. It's not published yet, but it shows that the role of telematics is not a strong role in managing risk. Got any questions? Please do contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Or do you ask your questions now? Has anybody got a question to kick off any discussion? You can raise your hand or you can pop it in the chat. I do have a question for you, Nicola, while people are preparing their questions. There was one slide that was quite interesting. So I think there was a bit of difference in participants reporting whether they thought they were going to be stopped by the police, and then some of them had reported that they had been stopped by the police. And it was higher in both cases for the gig workers. So I was wondering, did you kind of think about any sort of justification for those responses, or any further thoughts on that?
I suppose if they are having a high mileage where they're not being approached by the police or going through red lights, speeding and not being apprehended, then it probably reinforces that behaviour. There's only a small proportion that said they'd actually been stopped by the police. So do they feel, I mean, the fear of being caught should change people's behaviour, but obviously they don't have a fear of being caught. So I thought that was quite interesting.
And more gig workers being caught by the police than the restaurant delivery workers. Do you think that's because of rider behaviour, or?
Well, they are admitting to more violations.
Yeah.
So then,
perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Any questions? Amy.
Hi. Thanks. That was really, really interesting, Nicola. I was wondering, are you going to repeat the same sort of research with people who do deliveries with pedal bicycles or e-bikes?
I've already done it with pedal cyclists. So that was a paper that was published back in 2019. Mm-hmm. Yes, and that also included motorcyclists. So part of the reason for this piece of research was to see, was it the risk of being a motorcyclist delivering food, or was it the risk associated with being in the gig economy? And it shows that actually this piece of research, all the risks are exacerbated if you're working for the gig on a motorbike.
Right. Okay.
So I have looked at pedal cyclists as well. Fatigue is an issue. Collisions are an issue. Lack of protective gear is an issue. And again, they are also incentivized to go out when it's wet and it's cold. By being paid more.
Yeah, I wondered if there was sorry.
No.
I was wondering if there's an additional risk because there's been some, let's say, less safe, cheap conversions from pedal bicycles to electric bikes that have been in the press, and I wonder if anyone's investigating the added risk from that as well.
Not yet, but I think that is a very important area that we need to look at, because obviously they can travel a lot faster than a pedal cycle, and I've seen them and they are emerging. We also have this whole thing about hyperlocal deliveries on e-bikes. So people are using them, if you want that chocolate bar at 11 o'clock at night and it's raining and it's cold outside, let me just ring up for a hyperlocal delivery. And all the big supermarkets are signed up for these. So Morrison's, Marks and Sparks, Waitrose, they are supporting this, and they're saying, it's sustainable because it's an electric bike. But actually, is it sustainable from the health of that person riding that bike? And no one's questioning it. I think the consumers consume these services and have no idea about the associated risks for these individuals. They were low paid, and the everything about, if there are any police on the line, we talk about the fatal four. Well, this is impairment, distraction and speeding, all of the things that we know are not good for road safety. And this business model of the gig just completely creates a kind of existential threat to everything we know about road safety.
There's a question in the chat here. So relating to workers being paid more during poor and dangerous weather conditions, what were the views from the workers on this? Did it encourage people with lower incomes to work more at those times?
Well, I suspect it would do, wouldn't it? If you're going to earn more, I think we have to understand that you have to segment these group of people. So some of the motorcyclists we talked to were people who just wanted to supplement their income a bit and they enjoyed motorcycling. But there's a whole group of people who are desperate, who are absolutely desperate on low income, and a lot of them lost their jobs during the pandemic. And this was a way of earning money and to support and supplement low income. So it is a mixed group of people. And another thing I would say is that I don't want to say that this work should not happen, but it needs to happen safely, and there are ways and means to manage it in a safe way. And I suspect it's here to stay, but some countries do not accept these companies operating in their countries. So, we're creating a bit of a difficult situation for ourselves in many ways.
Madeline Boss, I think you've taken your hand down, but if you wanted to ask your question still. If not, we can move to Heather Ward, who's still got your hand up.
Heather is a co-author. You're muted, Heather.
Hello, everybody. Yes, coming back to this point about people being incentivized to go out in bad weather, the public has a part to play in this as well, as the restaurant and the app people, because if it's a filthy night, you don't fancy going out, yet you're quite happy to call in one of these young drivers on an unsafe means of transport to bring you, as Nicola's said, perhaps a chocolate bar or a cup of coffee or something quite trivial rather than a full meal at that time of night. And I think the public has a role to play if we need to help the public understand the risks that their behaviour is imposing upon these young people. I know people will still continue to do it, but I think that when we've given presentations in this area before, people have been absolutely shocked and said, I'm never going to do this again. And so I think it is something that we all have a part to play in and to actually get this publicised from a human perspective rather than just a management perspective.
Thanks, Heather. Madeline, do you want to ask your question? You're on mute at the moment.
Sorry. Yeah, it was just on that. What you said, Heather, made me think more about, because I felt like Nicola had answered what I was going to ask about how it to me, it wasn't incentivizing people to drive out in bad weather. That my brother did gig work and he felt like it was a reward for going out in horrible weather. And I know that he did not earn a lot, and he was not the most in need of that money, but he was doing it to earn his entire living, and that made it really worthwhile going out on those nights, especially when it was someone stoned who'd ordered a single chocolate bar and then would give him an extra £5 note because that's what they did. But I just wondered in your study whether you'd encountered something I found very shocking about the behaviour of some of my friends when they got a meal delivered while I was there and refused to accept it and had the delivery person sent back and probably lose money on that because the food had got slightly squashed. And I just wondered how they had totally lost their humanity in that division between that was created by the app.
Yeah.
That I felt like they would never have behaved like that
exactly
in a normal situation.
Yeah. I mean, some of them get tips. As you say, your brother got a tip. Some people do get tips, but other people, they can reject the meal and then they get it free and then that person doesn't get any money. It's a game that they can play. And I have described these companies as anonymous, like digital brokers of work, and they externalize all the risks and take all the profits. And to me, that is unacceptable. And I think there is a huge job. Well, even with restaurants, there's a job of work to be done to say, do you really want to use the gig economy? Why don't you employ people? But about a week ago on the news, Just Eat said that they had their own employed riders, which is a safer model, but they were going to revert to the gig model. I don't know whether that's because of cost of living or whatever. So people are wanting to have this kind of 0 hours, this labour that they can just tap into as and when. So I think there are many. It's a multi-agency, multifaceted problem that needs lots of different work. But when I hear saying, we need to train the riders, no, we don't need to train the riders. We need to address the business model.
And also the response of the police. In my local area, it has been a case of them really othering delivery riders and thereby creating an image of criminal behaviour around micromobility, which means that micromobility is no longer the practical, normal thing to do. It's something that dangerous people do. And there are PSPOs that are totally misused in the city centre, and riders of bikes, motorbikes, e-bikes are being stopped because they are seen as antisocial.
Yeah, but this is, yeah, issues, a lot of issues around this, I think, definitely.
Can I take a question from Julian next, please?
Hi there, Nicola. Thanks so much for that presentation. Just had a couple of points. One, I wondered whether you'd tried to reach out to and work with the actual platform providers and any of the major restaurant businesses who I guess over the last few years have been sort of pulled kicking and screaming into the sort of addressing some of the safety issues.
Yeah.
And then I also wondered whether you've been looking at any of the planning issues around dark kitchens and some of the, I mean, the trip generations at them are like nothing I've ever seen anywhere. And
Yeah.
then some of the other sort of social environmental impacts that come with that, plus the lack of facilities for the riders themselves in terms of covered areas, toilets.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the other point I'm quite interested in was obviously meal deliveries have existed for decades and the quantity of them have grown like exponentially in recent years. But I wonder if you knew if anybody had done any work about when people used to go and collect their meals themselves from restaurants and the safety of how they drove in their cars or on their motorbikes to collect them.
Yeah, no, I haven't done anything like that. In terms of, you've asked me a lot of questions there.
Sorry, yeah.
That's what you said about we talked to restaurant managers, so we have talked to some of the big chains of, so the managers from some of the big chains, especially the pizza places. So we talked to them. You try and get hold of the app companies. Who do you go to? Where are they? We don't know. They don't, you know, they say that we are not, they don't want to look like an employer, because if you look like an employer, even though they tell people where to go, they give them the jobs and tell them where to go, they don't want to look as if they have anything to do with employment. So that person is self-employed ostensibly. So they don't, the risks are associated with the person who takes that work, not with the app. So I think it's almost impossible to get hold of them. Now, what was the other question you asked me around?
The other one was sort of around the dark kitchens and the trim generation rates, and then the impacts of all those people sort of waiting in high streets or at dark kitchens. Or
yes, so these dark kitchens, if anyone doesn't know what they are, they're just basically, you can set up in a warehouse and produce hot food and then get it obviously delivered by bike. So that these are, they're unregulated. We don't know the hygiene or anything about them. Because they're dark, I don't know where they are, but they do exist, and I know that a lot of the councils are very worried about it. So I think the delivery rider on a motorbike has become as iconic as someone with a mobile phone or a coffee cup at the moment when you look at it in urban centres, and they are hovering around all the restaurants. They're operating in complex urban areas where there are many other people and many other road users. So I think we need more data to show the evidence and to see, you know, are these people delivering food? If someone's come off, we know the most vulnerable mode. So I think we need a particular piece of work, working with the police, to actually capture this data and say, yeah, whether it's violations or actual injury crashes. I think it's very important.
Thank you. Anne, if you've got a really quick question before we move on to Cosmin's presentation.
Yeah, very quickly. So just to address the employer issue, so the HSC have actually revised their guidance on driving and riding for work, and now it very clearly states that the gig economy actually is the responsibility of anybody who directs their work. So it doesn't matter how they're employed. Along those lines, just to say that we are doing some work with both the HSE and the police, looking at how we make sure that employers are not systemically failing in their duty. So it's right at the very beginning, but that will include looking at the gig economy. But alongside that, it's very difficult to change behaviour of people who buy food and then want people to come and deliver to them, because obviously it's a convenience for them. It's also very difficult to change the behaviour of employers, because if they do the right thing, they may feel they've been put at a disadvantage commercially. So maybe something like a charter, a code of conduct that every restaurant would sign up to, saying that they would not put their staff in these situations, and they would all feel that they were standing together then, and nobody has a commercial disadvantage. Just a thought.
Well, that is my whole idea, or our whole idea behind an ethical delivery service, and that's what we're looking at in another project, as you know, about in the delivery sector, in the last mile delivery. So I think, you know, getting that like stamp of approval
absolutely
good.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nicola.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Nicola, if you want to pop any links to any of these projects in the chat, please feel free. That'd be really interesting. Or if you've got any resources to share with us later, that'd be good. If I can introduce next, please, Cosmin Popan, who's going to present on the fragile art of multi-apping, resilience and snapping in the gig economy. Thank you, Cosmin.
Thank you, Lucy. I'm just gonna share the screen with you. Can you see?
We've got your screen up so far. If you're able to put in presenter mode, or we'll begin the slideshow, perhaps.
Not really sure. So, can you see the whole screen now, not just the slide?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you want to try the slideshow, maybe? Like.
Just a second. Okay, so I will just put it on full screen and you let me know if. Can you see it now full screen?
At the moment, it's the same. It's kind of showing your PowerPoint.
Now?
Yeah, that's showing a full screen of the slides without you know.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Nicola, for a very interesting presentation. I think that just by looking at the title of this presentation, it looks very niche in relation to what has been discussed so far, but I will make the case that multi-apping is actually an important practice on the one hand on the gig economy that Nicola has mentioned already, but also it says a lot about how we are framing issues of health and safety, and more generally about being resilient in the gig economy. And amongst food couriers, I have been working with this. This comes across as a form of resilience. So my research is a 3-year postdoctoral ethnographic work, multi-sited research in 3 different cities across Europe. I have done research in Manchester, working as a courier and doing small interviews following couriers at work. I have been doing the same thing in Romania, in Cluj, and as of late, I'm based in Lyon, where I have been doing the same things every time with different platforms. And here on the left-hand side, you have Deliveroo. These are not necessarily my my screenshots. And Uber, 2 of the apps I have been using myself as well as I was doing this fieldwork. And as you will see in the following slides, I have several illustrations, and I want to point out to the fact that this is a multidisciplinary effort, in the sense that I have been collaborating with artists to illustrate some of the career and life stories of those doing deliveries, kind of echoing what has been said already about not really knowing, especially amongst customers, what these working conditions look like. So I will start with a vignette. I had an accident story which has happened last autumn on the 20th of October. I was logged in on Uber Eats, and I had an accident, and the foot didn't necessarily fell off, but I had to take a couple of days off. I had to go and had stitches, and the outcome of that was that I tried to figure out what kind of money I can claim from Uber, because I was logged into the app, and normally I should get some money to cover these expenses. And after about 3 months of back and forth emails, where I was asked for different papers, like obviously from the doctor, but also I was asked to provide a different bank account than the one that I was using to be paid for deliveries I was doing. That was not a French account, but for this purpose, they wanted me to have a French account. So it took about 3 months before I got these 225 euros back, and also obviously hardly covers for the 2 weeks when I was not really able to work. But also this story, I would want to contextualize it in saying that I want to reflect on my positionality as I describe these things, because obviously I was in a situation where I was a European citizen with the right to work, and could set up my own self-employed status in France and have my own account, which is very important, because the vast majority of people doing deliveries in France, and I think in the UK as well, and I would have wanted probably to hear a bit more about the experiences of work, health and safety from Nicola on this matter. The vast majority of this population is migrants and undocumented migrants. So things would have stand pretty much differently if this accident happened to somebody who wouldn't have had the documents and not working on his own account, but rather renting or buying one, and what implications would that have? Okay, so in the media and in a lot of the discussions about health and safety, and in the ones that Nicola has mentioned as well, many of the things with regards to this are oftentimes reflected in the media headlines when somebody's being stabbed or somebody's being killed while doing deliveries, and this has happened quite a lot in recent years, as you might know. In Manchester, one of the couriers has been telling me casually about the attacks that he's been facing, and how somebody tried to steal their bike. What I want to say in relation to this, and make this point quite early in my presentation, because again, what has been said before is quite important, and I totally agree with the fact that platforms have a kind of pathological approach to health and safety, as Nicola said, and this kind of they create an existential threat to health and safety. I would say more than that, these platforms are, in their very design that they have, in their own design, in the way they are conceived themselves, they are a threat, and they are there to jeopardize health and safety of couriers. So it's in their design, it's in their model of doing algorithmic management of work, of this kind of a self-employed model that places all responsibility on these couriers, who have to take additional risks, as I will show. which is oftentimes being framed in the general parlance, but also in academic literature as a sort of resilience. And that's what I want to criticize in this presentation. So going back to kind of a more casual forms of health and safety issues, is again street attacks and what kind of attitude some of the couriers adopt with regards to how they protect themselves. This is a courier from a girl actually from Manchester who's been telling me, look, I have a pepper spray with me, as she was checking through her bag, and I was like, why is that for? So she kind of told me that she has to carry that one around. Obviously, inclement weather, something that has been already mentioned by Nicola in her presentation, and how this oftentimes this leads to couriers being incentivized to work more for more money, and particularly in the context of COVID. The couriers were not allowed to stay indoors and to wait for their orders. They were kept outside. And this is a story of a courier, a lady from Romania who was doing deliveries in the winter, and she couldn't really stay indoors. Obviously, COVID infections, something that is very it's been a very common occurrence amongst many of the couriers I have been interviewing. Obviously, they were essential workers during the COVID time, and then obviously very soon afterwards, their payment decreased, and oftentimes they were also kicked off their jobs because they were hired in great numbers before the pandemic, or when the pandemic started. Okay, so now I will go to pick up on this particular practice, which is multi-upping, that I have discovered it as I was doing deliveries for the very first couple of weeks, not very experimented with using one app. And then I was in Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester and bumped into Adib, who was multi-upping, and I was like, what is this? So he was logged in at the same time on Deliveroo and Uber Eats, accepting orders from one or another. None of the two apps were as busy as they used to be because of the pandemic situation that I explained, and the companies getting more people onboarding them, as they call the hiring process, and there was a lack of jobs. So he had to do this multi-upping, turning the other one off as he receives an order, but sometimes accepting order on both apps at the same time, which requires some skills. Experience with the apps, the restaurants, knowing where they are, waiting times, knowing the city, knowing the one-way streets, knowing shortcuts, obviously. But also he must be sure that restaurants do not have long waiting times, that they are not far from one another, and that clients are in proximity or along the same route. So all these things he has managed to learn them as time progressed. And he's been very successful with multi-upping, and he was kind of extolling the virtues of being able to do that. And that was in October 2020 that we had an interview. And then 2 years later, a year and a half later, last summer when I went back to Manchester, I met Adib again and I asked him, so how's work? Well, I have 4 apps now, and I do more work for the same amount of money. So basically, he's carrying 4 different, not necessarily 4 different phones, but probably 4 different batteries for their phones, for the phones he has, even if he has 2, but constantly juggling between these 4 apps. So multi-apping as a virtue. I was not surprised hearing Adib saying how good this is and how easy a way to earn more money it is. And then as I progress my research, I've seen that this is a common practice amongst many of the couriers in Manchester, to the extent that you would have somebody coming with an Uber bag delivering you your food, but actually they work for Deliveroo. So that's something that might puzzle you, but actually that's what's happening oftentimes. So there is a burgeoning online community extolling the fine art of multi-apping with blogs and YouTube tutorials, kind of explaining how you can make the most of this and what actually you have to be thinking about and how to be strategic about the whole thing. So I see this multi-apping as a form, a response to work intensification. So, and this is happening because the gig economy is a particular type of fragmented time model of employment. It's different from the classical time center model of employment that we had after the war, working time divided into identical and abstract periods. And what we have now is a fragmented time model of employment, which transforms time into an adjustable variable. So hourly pay is replaced by piecework, and the risk and costs associated with any inefficiency in time use are shifted onto the workforce. So as a result, couriers have to be dealing with all this unpaid time, and they do so by multi-apping. So in the literature, generally, there's not a lot about this practice, even though it's very prevalent, and it is described oftentimes as a subversive resilience to get by, and it is listed amongst many other strategies, such as account renting. I was just mentioning the migrants doing these kind of things, vehicle upgrade, switching from a type of vehicle, a bicycle to a motorcycle, oftentimes, using messaging platforms to share insights. So I would argue that this multi-apping is an individual coping mechanism with precarious working conditions, but doesn't really challenge existing exploitative labor relations. And it's an attribute and becomes functional to capitalist intensive mode of production, and actually triggers more work intensification rather than somehow managing to keep riders resilient and full stop. So I also use the concept of snapping in relation to this form of resilience, which sometimes is not sustainable, as I will show. And Sarah Ahmed describes snapping, kind of drawing on a feminist perspective, the moment when it's no longer possible to accept a relationship which is experienced as oppressive. Well, in the case of platform workers, snapping can be a road accident. And we have been discussing a lot of such health and safety issues. And this is why I say that this is in the very design of these platforms, because they force people into upgrading vehicles, into working in incremental weather because they are getting paid more, into doing multi-apping because there's too many of them that they have been onboarded by these platforms. So snapping is such a response to this resilience that is not sustainable. And I have here one such story where snapping can be understood a bit better. So this is one other courier that I have been working in Manchester, and he did recently an upgrade from his e-bike to a motorcycle, and then he also does that multi-apping, but for two apps only. As you see in this drawing, he kind of describes what needs to be done, as I was kind of already mentioning, and then he says, well, what this upgrade mean, and what this means in terms of intensification of work as a form of a particular form of resilience, another form of resilience which upgraded the vehicle from an e-bike. When you're on an e-bike, you're not that fast. You can use the phone in one hand and keep an eye on the road. But on the motorbike, you can't do that. The police see you and you get 3 or 6 points straight away. But not only that. So he had a near miss. I heard a horn loud, very loud. So he was in an intersection and checking his phone because there was a notification for a new order from another app. So he was already doing a delivery or in a way to do a delivery. And he got a notification from the other platform to pick up another order. And he was so enthusiastic that he gets more money that he forgot he was in an intersection. And he had a near miss, and you can see the kind of a traumatic experience it was that he had to kind of stop at the side of the road and breathe in, breathe out for a couple of minutes. Okay, so I've been using this concept of and practice of multi-apping to examine critically the concept of resilience and its shortcomings. And I have shown that it is more than an ingenious and effective coping mechanism. It is a form of resilience which helps to navigate precarious working conditions and poor remuneration, but it does not challenge the structural problems of the gig economy. And it's rather an individual disposition. And more than that, as I have shown through a couple of vignettes, including my own, even though I was not necessarily multi-apping, I was just in a rush, has negative consequences at a more personal level. And this is it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cosmin. There's not too much time left of this session, but does anybody have any questions? I see Nicola, you've got a question, please.
Do you think distraction, because of multiple apps, leads to a high level of distraction for these workers, which we know is not good for road safety? So if you've got apps going bing, 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 is it going to be higher for the multi-appers? And thank you for your presentation, by the way, it's great.
Thank you. Well, most of the time they would not necessarily stop as they are already on the route, as they would get a notification. And this notification, it's not to do just with multi-apping. Notifications are coming from clients who are asking and sending you messages or calling you, where are you? Because you are late and it's maybe not your fault. You can get a notification again from the app saying there's an increase in it's surge in demand, so you'll get paid more. So it's a notification to work more. And I mean, yes, there are these probably, as Nicola mentioned, kind of messages, notifications from companies where they try to show that actually they care about your well-being, and maybe you'd get this notification, or maybe you take a rest. Have you thought about it? But actually, on the other hand, they do the very opposite. They do these notifications, and they just make sure that these guys are not in a safe position whenever they are on the road.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Madeline?
I've just put in the chat a photo from a restaurant I went to where they begged me to just come in and order because they weren't making any money on the apps as well. So I just wondered whether you heard from the companies, whether there was a snap point for them as well.
That's a very good question, and I think I mean, there's been a whole discussion with up until now about the kind of a similar situation, similar boat that customers, workers in the gig economy and workers in the restaurants are to an extent, because I don't think it's necessarily productive to say, well, you should be more responsible as customers necessarily, because many of these people are not just having a munchies because they have smoked some weed, but actually at the end of a tiring day, they don't have energy to cook. And I know couriers who order food after a day at work. So I think just to get back to the restaurants, I think there's a lot of tensions between restaurant staff and couriers, because they don't really see themselves as being on the same side of, and these people are oftentimes abused by the couriers. Restaurant staff report them and they have their accounts deactivated, and so on and so forth. So there's hardly any dialogue oftentimes between these different entities, I would say, which should be on the same side. And yeah, I mean, these workers as well, they cannot really refuse. I was at McDonald's in Romania, and they cannot really refuse more orders if they come through the app. They have to take each and every one of them, even though that means like long waiting time. So so the gig work also kind of works because they don't hire more staff in most situations. They just redeploy staff, and then you have them busy with the customers inside, and then you have the other one which kind of doubles sometimes at the rush hours, at busy hours, the numbers of orders with the same staff.
Cosmin, I was just wondering if your research has any implications for like future interventions or legislation. Have you had any success in communicating with the actors kind of involved in legislation change, for instance?
Well, I have had mostly public engagement activities. And I have a website that I will be sharing with you, which is connected, and the illustrations are connected to the website, because it's a multimedia interactive platform featuring and hosting stories of couriers, life and work stories. So I have had exhibitions that I have organized in Manchester and Romania, and now in Lyon with this artwork for the general population. And generally, I have had a lot of kind of public engagements, media interventions, and the like. Not necessarily from a policymaker's point of view. I'm currently contributing to a chapter by the European Trade Union Institute, which are kind of more on the advocacy side. So on this matter, it's mostly kind of action and activist research that I'm doing rather than more than that.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if there's any kind of implications even for local authorities in terms of like providing infrastructures for shelter, for example, where people can wait, or if there's more kind of incentive to kind of build cycling infrastructure for e-bikers, say, so they don't have this kind of interactions with road traffic.
I thought an interesting point to have, because before my intervention, there was a discussion about the role of the police, and it's the same situation as with regards to changing the status of these workers for self-employed to the employees. And I think these kind of solutions can be a bit blind to what the reality is and who these workers are and how their migrant status doesn't really get any better in any encounters with the police, and how trying to regularize them through work or kind of changing their status leaves these people in a limbo because they don't have papers. So they are renting accounts. So I think all the discussions about how we address this without really looking at who these workers are, and this is why we understand, and we have to understand, that it's in the design of these platforms actually the things we've been discussing about, because these are infrastructures for these platforms, these populations. They are disposable. So we have to understand this whenever we're trying to propose solutions, and how we involve the police, the state, and so on and so forth, because these problems are more complex than they seem on appearance.
That's a good point. Thank you. Yeah. Julian, do you have a really quick question just to finish off the session?
Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation. I was just interested that some people had done work on the subcultures that emerged mostly from cycle and motorbike parcel deliveries from the sort of 70s and 80s, with all the language and the clothing and the socialization between the people, mostly from people who were doing the work themselves, who wrote some of it up. I just wondered if you or anybody else is doing work on whether subcultures exist for the meal delivery and the other gig workers using bicycles in these days, or whether there's less of a community in that sense.
I could try to say something, even though I think feels like I'm monopolizing the discussion here. Yeah, there used to be these subcultures with and I think we have Justin here, Justin Spinney, who has done a bit more research than I did on the topic of couriers from the 90s and the 2000s, and this kind of a heroin chic subculture, and yeah, probably this was the case as well to an extent in the early 2010 when these platforms appeared initially, and it was mostly students, locals, rather than immigrants on motorcycles or undocumented migrants on push bikes. And I mean, there are communities, and probably there's a discussion to be had, but not here, about organizing and how these workers are organizable or not. But certainly not the subculture that the 90s produced in the US and then in big European cities as well a bit later.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. I guess I'm sorry we've overrun slightly, but a massive thank you to our speakers today, Cosmin Popan and Nicola Christie, and thanks to everyone who's attended and the great discussions that we've had today. I've popped in a couple of links to signing up to Think if you're interested to hear about more events, and we've got an event coming up which is a workshop around co-production by the Co-Production Lab Wales. And Amy's popped in another link for you to check out there. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us. It was really interesting topics, discussions, lots of precarity, lots of kind of issues to kind of resolve and work through. And I'm also kind of aware that there's slightly less kind of research around the impacts to public health and what this means kind of other road users and shared spaces in cities, for example. So watching out for kind of future research projects around that. But yeah, thanks everybody, and hope you have great evenings.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.